My father was 63 years old when he had his first stroke. He was on medication. He was seeing his doctor regularly. He was doing everything he was supposed to do. And none of it was enough. I was 26 at the time, just finishing my medical training. And I remember standing in that hospital corridor, looking at my father lying in that bed, a man who had done everything right, and thinking, something is missing from this picture. Something important that nobody is talking about. That's the year I decided to become a cardiologist. Not to learn how to treat high blood pressure, but to understand why the treatment so often isn't enough. What I found took me 20 years of research, practice, and more than a few uncomfortable conversations with colleagues. And I'm going to give it to you today in 20 minutes. Stay with me, because what comes next changed how I practice medicine. And it might change how you think about your own health. If you're in your 60s or 70s today, you grew up in an era of very specific medical advice. Watch your salt, avoid fat, take your medication, trust the numbers, and you followed it. Most of you followed it faithfully. You switched to low-fat products, you put down the salt shaker, you filled your prescriptions without fail, and yet here you are, still dealing with blood pressure that won't fully cooperate, still adding medications, still wondering what you're missing. Here is what you're missing. And I say this with enormous respect for the generation of physicians who came before me. The advice was incomplete. Not wrong exactly, but incomplete in a way that matters enormously. The missing piece is this. High blood pressure is not primarily a salt problem. It is not primarily a weight problem. It is not even primarily a stress problem, though all of those things play a role. High blood pressure, in the vast majority of people over 60, is primarily an inflammation problem. Imagine the walls of your arteries not as pipes, which is how most people picture them, but as living tissue. Dynamic, responsive, constantly reacting to their environment. When that tissue is healthy, your arteries expand and contract with every heartbeat like a perfectly tuned instrument. When that tissue is chronically inflamed, it thickens, it stiffens, it narrows, and your heart has to generate more and more pressure just to move blood through. That inflammation doesn't announce itself. There's no fever, no obvious pain. It burns slowly, quietly at a cellular level, year after year, while your blood pressure climbs. Here's what I spent 20 years learning, that inflammation has specific causes, and those causes are, to a remarkable degree, things you can actually address. Not instead of your medication, alongside it. In your kitchen, starting today. 5 things, that's all this is. 5 things that my father never knew about, and that I wish I had understood clearly enough to explain to him before that day in the hospital corridor. Let's start with the one that surprised me most. I want to tell you about a conversation I had at a cardiology conference about 8 years ago. A colleague of mine, a researcher from Cairo, was presenting data on a plant extract showing consistent results in blood pressure trials. The room was politely interested, mildly skeptical, the way cardiologists tend to be when something doesn't come in a blister pack. After the presentation, I pulled up the full study. Then I pulled up 3 more. Then I went home and made myself a cup of the stuff, because what I was reading was genuinely remarkable. The plant is hibiscus, specifically Hibiscus sabdarifa, the deep red dried flowers used across West Africa, the Caribbean, Egypt, and Mexico for centuries. My grandmother made a version of it called it zobo, served it cold at every family gathering. I drank it as a child without the faintest idea I was drinking something with measurable cardiovascular effects. Here's what the science shows, and I want to be precise because the mechanism matters. Your body regulates blood pressure partly through an enzyme called ACE, angiotensin converting enzyme. What ACE does is send a signal to your blood vessels telling them to constrict, to tighten. In a healthy system, this is a useful regulatory tool. In a person with chronically elevated pressure, this signal is stuck, like a thermostat that won't turn off. The vessels stay tight when they should be relaxed. The pharmaceutical response to this is a class of drugs called ACE inhibitors, among the most prescribed blood pressure medications on the planet. They work by blocking that enzyme, interrupting the signal. What the research on hibiscus demonstrates is that the anthocyanins and organic acids in the dried flowers act through the same fundamental pathway. Natural ACE inhibition, without the pharmaceutical, without the dry cough that sends so many patients back to their doctor asking for something different. A peer-reviewed study in the Journal of Nutrition documented an average reduction of 7 points in systolic blood pressure in adults drinking hibiscus tea daily over 6 weeks. 7 points is not a dramatic headline, but 7 points, sustained, is clinically meaningful. It is the kind of shift that changes a risk category. 3 cups per day, hot or cold. The mechanism is not affected by temperature. The taste is tart, almost cranberry-like, and genuinely pleasant once you're used to it. One critical caution I want to be very direct about. If you are currently taking ACE inhibitor medication, lisinopril, ramipril, and enalapril, or any of their relatives, please speak with your doctor before making hibiscus a daily habit. Combining a natural ACE inhibitor with a pharmaceutical one can push your pressure further than intended. Dizziness, falls, fainting episodes. In people over 60, these are not minor inconveniences. They are genuine risks. Lower is not always better. Stable and controlled is better. For everyone else, this is one of the most evidence-supported, accessible, and genuinely enjoyable additions to a cardiovascular routine that I know of. My grandmother, it turns out, something the conference room was just beginning to catch up with. 3 cups a day. Start tomorrow morning. I want to talk about apple cider vinegar in a way that most people haven't heard, because the conversation around it tends to land in one of 2 unhelpful places. Either it's being sold as a miracle that cures everything, or it's being dismissed entirely as folk medicine nonsense. The truth, as it usually is, lives somewhere more interesting. There is solid, peer-reviewed science behind apple cider vinegar's effect on blood pressure. Not because of anything mysterious or magical, because of one specific compound, acetic acid, and 2 very well understood physiological pathways. The first pathway is metabolic. Acetic acid improves insulin sensitivity at the cellular level. Most people think of insulin purely in the context of diabetes and miss the cardiovascular connection entirely. Every time your blood sugar rises quickly after a meal, your pancreas releases insulin to bring it back down. That surge of insulin causes your blood vessels to constrict, physically, measurably. Your pressure goes up for an hour or 2 after every high carbohydrate meal. And most people have no idea this is happening. They check their blood pressure in the morning on an empty stomach, get a reasonable reading, and assume everything is under control. Improved insulin sensitivity, which acetic acid consistently produces in controlled studies, means smaller blood sugar spikes, smaller insulin surges, and less of that post-meal vascular constriction. The pressure stays lower not just in the morning, but throughout the day. The second pathway is direct. Acetic acid stimulates your blood vessel walls to produce nitric oxide, the molecule your body uses to signal arterial relaxation. Think of nitric oxide as your cardiovascular system's natural off switch for tension. When it's present in adequate amounts, your arteries stay open and compliant. When it's depleted through chronic inflammation, poor diet, and the natural changes that come with age, the vessels tighten and pressure rises. The protocol I recommend is straightforward. 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar diluted in a full glass of water, minimum 8 ounces, taken with your 3 main meals. Start with 1 tablespoon and work up to 2 if you tolerate it well. Never drink it undiluted. The acidity is enough to damage tooth enamel and irritate the esophageal lining over time. Use a straw. Rinse your mouth with plain water afterward. If you have a history of gastroparesis, esophageal problems, or active stomach ulcers, this one requires a conversation with your physician first. For everyone else, this is a $3 a bottle intervention with a genuine mechanism of action and a growing body of evidence. Not a miracle, not a replacement for anything prescribed, but a meaningful addition to what you're already doing. I started my own morning with a glass about 4 years ago. I haven't stopped. I want to tell you about the night my father called me from the hospital for the second time. 3 years after the first stroke. 2 in the morning. His wife, my stepmother, had woken up to use the bathroom and found him confused, sitting on the edge of the bed, unable to remember what year it was. He had checked his blood pressure the previous evening. It was fine, 132/81, acceptable, reassuring, and completely irrelevant to what was happening inside his arteries while he slept. This is the thing about blood pressure that most people, and frankly many physicians, don't discuss adequately. The reading you take when you're awake, sitting quietly at a reasonable hour, that reading is only part of the story. For a significant proportion of people over 60, Blood pressure does not follow the pattern it should during sleep. In a healthy cardiovascular system, pressure drops naturally during the night, 10 to 20% below daytime levels, typically. The heart rate slows, the vessels decompress. The entire system uses those hours to repair and recover. Cardiologists call people who show this pattern dippers. And being a dipper is genuinely protective against long-term cardiovascular damage. But a substantial number of older adults are, quote, non-dippers. Their pressure stays elevated through the night. Or worse, it spikes in the early morning hours before they wake, flooding their cardiovascular system with stress at the exact moment it should be at its most rested. This is nocturnal hypertension, and it is responsible for a disproportionate share of strokes and cardiac events that happen in the early morning hours, events that arrive without any warning from the previous evening's readings. Here is where walnuts come in, and I understand that sounds like an odd pivot. Bear with me. Multiple clinical studies have examined the effect of consuming approximately 30 grams before sleep. That is 14 walnut halves, a small handful, approximately 30 minutes before sleep. The results are consistent and specific to nighttime cardiovascular measures. Walnuts are exceptionally rich in alpha-linolenic acid, ALA, the plant form of omega-3 fatty acid. They contain meaningful concentrations of melatonin, the hormone governing your sleep-wake cycle, and they contain L-arginine, the amino acid your body converts directly into nitric oxide, the same vasodilating molecule we discussed in the context of apple cider vinegar. Together, these three compounds work during exactly the hours when your cardiovascular system most needs support. The ALA reduces inflammation. The melatonin synchronizes the natural pressure-dipping response. The L-arginine provides raw material for nitric oxide production precisely when your arteries should be relaxing. 30 grams, 14 halves, 30 minutes before bed. I told my father about this during his recovery from that second episode. He has been eating his handful of walnuts every night for 6 years. His overnight blood pressure monitoring now shows a consistent dipping pattern, something it did not show before. I am not suggesting walnuts saved my father. I am suggesting they are part of a picture his previous care left entirely incomplete. Let me ask you a direct question. What oil are you cooking with right now? Not what you think you should be. What is actually in a bottle in your kitchen at this moment? If the answer is canola oil, vegetable oil, sunflower oil, corn oil, or anything described as a blended cooking oil, I need you to understand something that nutritional guidance failed to communicate. Those oils are not inert. They are not simply a cooking medium. They are biologically active substances that directly amplify the chronic inflammatory processes driving your elevated blood pressure. These refined seed oils are extremely high in omega-6 fatty acids. For the vast majority of human history, the diet contained omega-6 and omega-3 in a ratio of 2 to 1 or 4 to 1. Today, most people over 60 are consuming omega-6 and omega-3 in a ratio closer to 20 to 1. Excess omega-6 drives pro-inflammatory signaling molecules that keep your vascular tissue chronically inflamed. And there is a second problem. These oils are chemically unstable at heat. Sunflower or canola oil in a hot pan oxidizes, breaking down into aldehydes and lipid peroxides directly toxic to your blood vessel lining. You cannot see this, but the damage accumulates with every meal. You cannot see this happening. Your food doesn't taste different, but the damage accumulates with every meal. So what belongs in your kitchen instead? 2 things. Extra virgin olive oil for everything that doesn't require very high temperatures. Rich in oleocanthal, a natural anti-inflammatory whose mechanism resembles ibuprofen at the molecular level without the side effects. Also rich in oleic acid, a monounsaturated fat actively supporting blood vessel flexibility. The cardiovascular evidence for extra virgin olive oil is among the deepest in all nutritional medicine. For high heat cooking, real butter from grass-fed cows where possible. Not margarine, which is manufactured from the very seed oils we're eliminating. The switch is simple. Different bottles in the cupboard. It costs no more. It requires no new recipes. And over 3 to 6 months, the effect on your inflammatory markers and through them on your blood pressure is measurable. It costs no more. It requires no new recipes. And over 3 to 6 months, the effect on your inflammatory markers and through them on your blood pressure is measurable. And I want to start by telling you why nobody prescribes this. When a physician has 12 minutes with a patient, they reach for tools that are fastest to communicate and easiest to measure. A medication has a dose. A dose has a number. A number can be tracked at the next appointment. The conversation takes 90 seconds and produces something concrete. Eat your vegetables before your carbohydrates takes considerably longer. It requires walking through glucose metabolism, insulin dynamics, and post-meal vascular physiology. It produces no number at the next appointment, so it doesn't get said. Not because it doesn't work, but because the system is not built to deliver it. Here is what the research shows, and I want you to understand the mechanism. When you eat carbohydrates first on an empty stomach, bread, rice, potatoes, pasta, they break down rapidly. Glucose floods your bloodstream quickly. Your pancreas releases a substantial insulin surge. That insulin surge causes vasoconstriction, a direct signal to smooth muscle cells surrounding your blood vessels, telling them to contract and narrow. Your blood pressure goes up measurably for the next hour or two. 3 times a day, every day, for years. 3 times a day, every day, for years. A recurring, preventable pressure event at every meal. Invisible because nobody checks blood pressure 30 minutes after eating. Now here's what changes when you eat in a different order. Vegetables first, a modest portion, just enough that fiber reaches your stomach and forms a viscous layer. A physical meshwork slowing the passage of everything that arrives afterward. When the carbohydrates follow, they are absorbed significantly more slowly. The glucose enters gradually. The insulin response is smaller and more controlled. And your blood vessels, rather than being squeezed by that surge, remain relaxed. Protein second, carbohydrates last. Vegetables, then protein, then carbohydrates. That is the complete sequence. I have a patient, a 68-year-old woman managing elevated blood pressure for 11 years. We made no changes to her medication, no changes to the food she was eating, only the order. Within 3 weeks, her post-meal readings had dropped by an average of 9 points, simply by rearranging the sequence of what was already on her plate. She told me she felt almost angry. Why has nobody told me this in 11 years? I didn't have a satisfying answer. The honest answer? The system is not designed to have this conversation, but you are hearing it now. Tonight, at whatever your next meal is, start with the vegetables. Every time, without exception. Free, immediate, no side effects except finishing your broccoli before your bread. I want to take you back to that hospital corridor. I was 26 years old. My father was in a bed behind a curtain. I was standing outside trying to understand how a man who had done everything his doctors told him, every pill, every appointment, every instruction, had ended up there anyway. What I understand now, 20 years later, his doctors were managing his pressure, competently and in good faith, but nobody was addressing what was generating that pressure in the first place. The inflammation, the oils he was cooking with every day, the bread first meals, the tea he could have been drinking, the walnuts that might have protected him through those dangerous early morning hours, the morning apple cider vinegar that could have improved his metabolic response to every meal. None of it exotic, none of it expensive, none of it requiring a prescription. I think about that corridor more than I probably should. The information existed, the research existed, some of it for decades. The gap was not in the science. The gap was in the delivery, in the 12-minute appointment with no room for mechanism and genuine understanding. That gap is what this video exists to close. These 5 things, hibiscus tea, apple cider vinegar, walnuts before bed, the oil switch, the meal sequence, they are not 5 separate ideas. They are 5 angles of attack on one single target. Chronic vascular inflammation. Every one of these 5 things reduces that inflammation through a different complementary mechanism. Together, they are not additive. They are synergistic. Each one makes the others more effective. The patients I have seen make all 5 changes, gradually, consistently, come back 3 months later with numbers that genuinely surprise their physicians. Medication doses reduced, markers trending downward, numbers that cooperate instead of creep. Not miracles, not cures, but genuine, measurable, sustainable progress of the kind that 12-minute appointments are structurally unable to create. You now have what they have. The question is what you do with it. Let me give you the 5 things one final time, clearly in order. 1. Hibiscus tea, 3 cups per day, hot or cold, minimal sweetener. If you are on ACE inhibitor medication, speak to your doctor before starting. For everyone else, begin tomorrow morning. 2. Apple cider vinegar. 1 tablespoon in a full glass of water, 3 times a day with your main meals, always diluted, through a straw if possible. Give it 3 weeks before you assess the effect. 3. Walnuts before bed. 30 grams, roughly 14 halves, 30 minutes before you sleep, every night. This one specifically targets what is happening to your cardiovascular system during the hours you cannot monitor it. 4. Change your cooking oils. Extra virgin olive oil replaces canola, vegetable, and sunflower oil for everyday cooking. Real butter, not margarine, for high heat. Make it once and it requires no further thought. 5. Change the sequence of your meals. Vegetables first, protein second, carbohydrates last. Same food, different order. Free, permanent, and effective from the very first meal you apply it to. Now, a word about how to start. Don't try to implement all 5 simultaneously. In my experience, people who attempt to change everything at once tend to change nothing for long. Pick the one that feels most natural given where you are right now. For some people, that's the oil switch. One decision, permanent, done. For others, it's the meal sequence. No shopping required, starts tonight. For others, it's the walnuts. Simple, specific, easy to remember. Start with 1. When it feels automatic, and it will, usually within 2 to 3 weeks, add the next. Build the foundation properly, and these changes will still be in place 5 years from now. I would genuinely like to know which one you are starting with. Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And if someone in your life is navigating the same territory, a spouse, a sibling, a parent, a close friend, please share this with them. This information should not be as hard to find as it currently is. If you found value here and you're not yet subscribed, please do. Every week, I bring you the kind of careful, evidence-grounded conversation about cardiovascular health that I believe every person over 60 deserves to have access to, and that the current structure of medical care too often fails to provide. My father is 79 years old now. He drinks his hibiscus tea. He eats his walnuts every night. He checks his blood pressure with the same diligence he always did. But the numbers he sees are different from the ones that landed him in that hospital bed twice. Not perfect. Not the numbers of a young man, but stable, controlled, and heading in the right direction. That is what this is about. Not perfection, direction. And one final thing, everything I have shared today is general health information based on published research and my clinical experience as a physician and cardiologist. It is not personalized medical advice. Please do not stop, reduce, or alter any medication your doctor has prescribed without having that conversation with them directly. Bring these 5 things to your next appointment. Ask your doctor which ones make sense given your specific situation and your current medications. That conversation is worth having. Your physician is your partner in having it. Take care of your heart. It has been working without a day off since before you were born. It deserves everything you can give it.